We all know the ocean can be a seriously intimidating place. It doesn't take much for your mind to run wild with everything that could go wrong out there. And once that worry starts, it's tough to shake off. For some folks, just the idea of swimming far out and getting tired is enough to keep them away. For others, especially those who like a bit more adventure, there are bigger threats to think about. We've all heard of the dangers lurking beneath the surface, especially sharks. The truth is, anything can happen out at sea. You could easily argue that it's one of the most unpredictable and dangerous places on Earth. And if there's anyone who truly understands that, it's a fisherman, which brings us right into today's story. These are the people who head out into the harsh ocean day after day. They face the power of nature head-on, deal with the cold, and even risk getting sick out there. It's definitely not a job for someone who wants an easy life. But what we hope this story shows is just how strong and committed these men are. They're not your average people. They stick together, look out for each other, and surprisingly, often look out for the sea life around them too. If you're curious to hear more, stick around until the end of the video. This is one worth hearing. Let's get into it. Any fisherman will tell you, no two trips out on the open water are ever the same. The sea still holds so many secrets, and you never know what strange things might end up in your nets. On top of that, the open ocean is one of the toughest environments anyone could work in. Some days, nothing too bad happens. It might even feel calm, almost relaxing. But other days, that's a whole different story. Just like we mentioned earlier, once you're out there, you have zero control over what the ocean decides to do. Things might seem fine, then suddenly the weather turns or something unexpected shows up from the deep. It could be a storm, powerful winds, or even an encounter with wild marine life. If you're someone who likes a routine or a safe job, then working on the sea definitely isn't for you. That's why most fishermen feel a sense of relief when they finally head back to shore after a few long, exhausting days. Sure, their job is physically and mentally draining, but that's also part of what makes it feel worthwhile. Think about it, going out there to catch food that helps feed your entire community. For a lot of fishermen, that's what gives their hard work meaning. It's more than just a job, it's part of who they are. Beyond that, of course, getting back home means finally escaping the brutal grip of the elements and being able to live life on your own terms again. If you're someone who needs year-round comfort and security, this line of work probably isn't the best fit. But when this fishing crew came across something totally unexpected on their way back to shore, none of them hesitated, not even for a second. The crew aboard the Golden Delight suddenly found themselves facing one of the ocean's darkest moments. But what they saw in the water that day might have made all the hardship worth it. It turned out to be the kind of story you never forget, a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Before we dive into it, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss one of our future videos. By this point, the crew had been out at sea for almost 2 full weeks. That's longer than usual, but during the first few days, they barely caught anything. Going back to the harbor with empty nets wasn't an option. They simply couldn't afford it. You could see the look in their eyes. Hope was starting to fade. Everyone knew this job wasn't easy, but things were getting harder than they'd ever imagined. The usual buzz and energy they carried with them on these trips? Gone, worn out. And honestly, who could blame them? They'd been told this voyage would be smooth and straightforward. The forecast looked good, the waters were familiar, and they were expecting to catch early and often. None of that happened. And now they were facing the consequences. Each of them started asking the same question. How did this go so wrong? They were all expected to return home with enough money to last for the rest of the year. That's how they'd provide for the families waiting back home. Every time one of them sat down with his head in his hands, it was clear. These were the low points, the darkest days of the trip. Even the captain couldn't hide his worry anymore. But here's the thing. These weren't just rookies. These were seasoned men, fishermen who had been through it all. Some had seen nearly every corner of the world. They had a lifetime of stories to tell, and still, none of that changed the one thing that mattered most. They were out here to provide for the people they loved. Most of them didn't have savings to fall back on. A bad trip meant a tough year. Being a fisherman isn't just physically risky, it's financially risky too. And the worst part? The pay doesn't reflect that. One of the biggest challenges they now faced was overfishing. There were fewer high-value catches than before, and it was getting worse by the day. Some trips, they ended up with fish that didn't even cover their costs. So this time, they made a tough call. They'd change course and head farther out, toward waters with less traffic. It was a gamble, but one they had to take. So by heading farther out, their chances of success finally started to rise. It took some time to reach the new spot, but thankfully, the effort paid off. They came across a wide stretch of open water with no other fishing boats in sight. That meant no competition, just them and the sea. The very first time they dropped their nets, they already had a strong feeling they'd found something big. And when they began hauling it back in, it was immediately clear. The net was heavier than anything they'd pulled in for nearly a year. After a tough struggle, they finally got the net on board, and what they saw made their jaws drop. It was packed with fish, all thrashing and flipping across the deck in a frenzy. In fact, that first catch might have been the biggest single haul they'd ever made. Within just 2 days of fishing in that new spot, the storage area was already filled to the top. With each successful haul, the crew grew more excited, celebrating every time another heavy net came up. It really felt like their luck had finally turned around. For those 2 days, everything just clicked. Every man on board would remember that feeling, the moment they realized that all the struggle and doubt hadn't been for nothing. It may have taken a lot out of them to get to that point, but they'd made it. Grins stretched across every face. They hugged, they shouted into the open air, letting the joy rise with the fading light. In that moment, it was easy to believe that things would always be this good. The wind felt so huge, they forgot just how unforgiving the sea could be. You could say that forgetting was their one big mistake. Alongside all the fish, the crew also spotted some amazing wildlife during those days. But the whales, those were something else entirely. Their size alone was enough to leave the crew speechless. Even with all their time spent at sea, many of the men had never seen whales so massive. No one on board doubted that these giants had the strength to knock over their boat if they wanted to. It was a mix of wonder and fear. Still, the crew couldn't help but laugh out loud when one enormous whale swam close and sent a tower of water shooting into the air from its blowhole. It was such a playful, childlike moment that just for a while, the crew felt like kids again. No one could stop smiling. Nothing could shake the magic of those days. The sea had given them a show they'd never forget. With the ship fully loaded, it was finally time to make their way home. They knew they couldn't wait much longer, or the fish would spoil, and that would mean all their hard work had been for nothing. They had been through a lot on this trip, seen just how dangerous the sea could be. But the journey home wasn't going to be easy. In fact, things took a turn for the worse. The waters they had to cross were rough, so dangerous that navigating straight through them just wasn't an option. They were forced to take a longer route to avoid risking everything. That detour alone added another 2 full days to their return trip. What that meant was turning back in the direction. They turned back slightly toward where they'd come from, trying to steer around the worst of the storm. They were far enough out that circling around it seemed possible. The captain warned them it would take more time, but it was the safest option. That didn't mean the water ahead would be calm, but at least they'd avoid the most dangerous parts. The storm was moving faster than their boat could, but if they stayed on course, they'd miss the worst of it. Thankfully, the captain's plan worked. They stayed just far enough from the storm's center. Still, the crew was beyond exhausted. After so long at sea, they were running low on fresh water and food, and the desperation to get home was starting to show. They all knew land was still at least a few days away. They'd have to tough it out just a bit longer. Luckily, being on a well-stocked fishing boat helped. With so much fish on board, they at least had food, and some of the rainwater they caught from the edges of the storm gave them enough to stay hydrated for now. As long as they kept moving toward shore, they had a chance. To pass the time, the remaining crew played cards or dice and stared out over the never-ending water. Sometimes they were lucky enough to spot sea life, but even that was becoming rare now. Boredom started setting in. The smell of fish was getting to everyone, and no one could stand it anymore. But then, good news, according to the captain, they were only about a day from home. Still, they couldn't see any land just yet. A few boats had passed in the distance earlier, and for a moment the crew considered approaching them to ask for help. Maybe even just a bit of clean water to speed things along. But after a short discussion, they realized stopping would only slow them down. And there was no guarantee the other boats even had anything to offer, or that they'd be willing to share with strangers. In the end, they chose not to risk it. The crew was too close to home now to accept any more delays. So they pushed forward. Then, just like that, a moment they'd all been waiting for arrived. One of the crew members spotted something far off near the horizon. Land. Real land. Faint, but unmistakable. Excitement exploded across the deck. Cheers broke out. Laughter filled the air. The crew couldn't hold back their joy. It was like they'd all just hit the jackpot. As the others celebrated, one crew member stood apart from the rest, his eyes locked on the land ahead. He couldn't look away. Home was finally in sight. He was about to see his family again. But then something unusual caught his attention in the water nearby. At first he squinted, trying to make sense of it. It was a dolphin, beautiful and familiar. While not rare, dolphins had been a welcome sight throughout this trip. On almost every voyage, the crew came across many of them. They always had to be careful not to trap one in their nets. A few times they'd caught one by mistake, but they'd always managed to free them again without much harm. But something wasn't right with this one. It was moving strangely, barely able to swim or dive. Within seconds, the sharp-eyed crew member saw the problem. The dolphin's tail was tangled in an old fishing net. It looked heavy, too, possibly from another boat, or even one of their own discarded nets. They, too, had lost a few of their own nets and pieces of equipment over the years. The dolphin looked completely worn out, clearly struggling under the heavy net wrapped around its body. It must have been a while, because the dolphin was alone. No other members of its pod were anywhere nearby. As the crew member took in what he was seeing, he quickly called out to the others. It took them a moment to understand. After all, they were still caught up in the excitement of finally spotting land after so long. But eventually everyone turned their attention toward the dolphin, just in time to catch a glimpse of it passing by the side of the boat. This was their one shot to help. But the dolphin wasn't close. It was still a fair distance away. Everyone on board knew it wasn't going to be easy to reach it. And by the time they all registered what was going on, the dolphin had already drifted behind them. It was now swimming in the opposite direction, slowly disappearing from view. Now the crew had a choice to make. Did they turn the boat around, chase after this struggling dolphin, and try to free it from the net, knowing it would add even more time to an already long trip? Or did they stay the course and finally make it home? They had all the reason in the world to just keep going. But the decision didn't take long at all. In fact, it was instant. Every single man agreed they had to go after it. Some people think that fishermen don't care about the creatures of the sea because they make their living catching them. But the truth is, fishermen often have a deep respect for the ocean and everything in it. With that, the captain turned the boat around and started heading toward the dolphin. They could see it trying to dive again and again, but each time it was dragged back up to the surface by the heavy net. The poor thing couldn't swim properly, let alone escape. Before long, they caught up to it. At first, the dolphin tried to veer off, but after a few weak attempts to flee, it just floated alongside the boat. Whether it was asking for help or simply too exhausted to run, they couldn't say. But either way, it wasn't moving anymore. They didn't have any special equipment on board to lift it up safely. So, reluctantly, they chose to use one of their own nets, something they knew the dolphin must already associate with pain. Even so, it was the only way. They tossed it out carefully. To their surprise, they managed to get the dolphin on the first try. Once it was on the deck, the crew gathered around. The first thing they had to do was get it loose from their own net. After that, they could finally deal with the larger net that had caused all the trouble. The net was still tightly wrapped around the dolphin's tail. Thankfully, it only took two of the stronger crew members to gently hold the dolphin in place, while the deck leader pulled out his knife and began carefully cutting it free. Once those were cut, the whole net slipped off with ease. Right away, the crew checked over the dolphin to make sure it hadn't been hurt more seriously. To their relief, it seemed to be in good shape, no major injuries. Even better, the dolphin was already looking more alert, moving a little more like its old self. With its tail now completely free, the team moved quickly. They opened the side gate on the deck and, with a bit of careful pushing, guided the dolphin back into the sea. The moment it hit the water, it dove deep, and just like that, it was gone from view. The crew stood in silence for a second, soaking it in. They couldn't have been more proud of what they'd just done. Then they got to work, closing the gate and cleaning the deck, while the captain turned the ship back toward land. The rescue had added 5, maybe 6 more hours to their trip, but no one was complaining. They all knew they'd made the right call. Not long after, something unexpected happened. A dolphin leapt alongside the boat. It looked even more graceful than before. In that moment, it wasn't just an amazing sight. It felt like something bigger. To them, this dolphin represented more than nature. It stood for something hopeful. As wild as it sounds, it felt almost like a sign. A reminder that even in the hardest times, beauty still finds a way to show itself. Sure, they were the ones who had rescued the animal. But somehow, it felt like the dolphin had rescued them too. No one could really explain why, but the whole crew felt it. And the man who first spotted the dolphin, he had his own thoughts. He never told the others, but deep down, he believed the dolphin had been sent for a reason. In their lowest moment, it had shown up and reminded them of the world's wonder. Ever since that day, something inside them changed. They had seen that no matter the struggle, the world still had a way of shining through. Who knows what that new outlook did for them in the years that followed? One thing's for sure. Every man on that boat understood that the sea would always be their greatest challenge. And when they saw that dolphin again, because yes, they were nearly certain it was the same one, it felt like a thank you. A quiet nod from one life to another. When they finally made it back to shore after that long, grueling trip, they brought back more than just a massive haul of fish. They came home with a story, one they'd tell again and again, a memory that would stick with them forever. So what do you think happened next on their future voyages? That's the thing about stories like this. Sometimes you think you've seen it all until you look a little closer. If this story moved you even a little, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you won't miss the next true tale from the sea. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.